that work? You had a certain amount of gravitational potential energy. And now it's got more. How'd that happen?
The energy is not coming from the fall or bouncing. It's coming from whatever the reactions you call it, opens back up or closes or whatever you want to call it.
Well, what do we call that?
That was the elastic potential energy. And it's going to be the same no matter what height you're dropping from. So if you get this hit the same way each time, it's going to bounce to the same height no matter where you get toss it from. But you can't get it to
This is an interesting theory. Does everybody agree with this? That it goes just as high no matter how far it can?
No, because actually ours went higher, even though we had it at arm's length at each time, it pumped higher than it did the original.
When you went, when you're saying when you drop it from lower, it goes higher.
Right.
But I think there are other variables that are playing a role. How much elastic potential energy each one is able to acquire. Based on that, it can go higher or lower. So there are really too many other variables because it's not really specific when you're dealing with your hand on that popper,
You're saying that the amount of loaded spring energy is different each time.
That's going to be different.
Well, let me ask you, did people find that it was consistent? If they did it, in other words, if they got a nice, sometimes it's wobbly and it goes off, but the times that it hit well, did it kind of go to a consistent height?
Yeah, I feel like the gravitational potential energy was kind of negligible. Like it didn't really, that was not contributing to.
Well, this is fascinating. So the hypothesis over here is that the gravitational potential, so you've got gravitational potential energy here, and you've got elastic potential energy. It hits the ground, and it goes back up. So where is that energy coming from? Some of it could be coming from the bounce, and some of it could be from the spring releasing. And your theory is what?
I think that the gravitational potential energy was negligible. When I dropped it from the waist height versus shoulder height, it bounced back up to the same height.
So let me say what you just said a little bit more precisely. There's gravitational potential energy, but you're saying it's not contributing to the final to the bounce.
If anything, it would probably hurt it because if you drop it from real high, it's going to sort of like damage it might even bounce a little before the elasticity springs it off.
It might fiddle with the release of the elastic.
Yeah. So, but the release of that is what's shooting it up to it.
In the nature of the mechanism, it's cupping air as it's falling, and so the higher up you go, the variable is the air resistance and that wobble that you were saying. Like I think the closer you are to the ground, really it's just the steadier spin you're getting, and so the flatter it is once it makes contact. Whereas if you're up high, it does tend to wiggle and wobble and kind of lose its potential energy in that sense.
Yeah, and I think you're getting, and your whole discussion there is, I think, within, you're playing within the hypothesis that height is not helping you. What you're trying to do is maximize the efficiency of the release of the elastic energy, not the we're going to get the sound energy in a minute. Just be patient. All right. Did you find there was a minimum height necessary? This is a fine point, but kind of an interesting one in the discussion of energy. Did you find there was a minimum height necessary? I mean, could you do it from 1 inch and would it launch?
If you spun it fast enough, you could go from lower heights.
If you spun it fast enough?
Yeah. Well, I got it to go from here because I spun it real fast and it took off. But if you spun it slow from the same height, it wouldn't go.
So that may be part of what's going on with the spin, is that it's...
Well, it's just more friction to make it...
But what is this but independent of its variation, what does that minimum height represent? So you've got this loaded spring, right?
Some kind of force is necessary to set the spring off. Some amount.
Yep. That's right. So the spring is loaded.
I can put it on the table and it doesn't go off.
Right. And it's not going to go off.
Yeah.
It's going to stay there. So it's sort of in a stable state. In physics, we would call this, it's quasi-stable, meaning that it's not in its most minimum energy state. It's in this, it's stable, but it's got potential energy that can be released. So you have to push it over. So it's like this. Here, let me give you an analogy. An analogy is like this. The analogy is like, so you can think of it in terms of gravitational potential energy. You've got a marble sitting right here. You need to push it a little bit, and then bam, it's gonna release its energy. Okay. So that minimum height is you need it to get over this. You need to get it over this hump. You know, in order to release that, as you know intuitively that you need to push on that thing to release that spring energy. But here's the trick about any kind of loaded. I mean, this is just like chemical potential energy. This picture explains to you how all kinds of energy processes work, even like the fuel in your car. When you burn your fuel, when you hit that spark in your combustion, your internal combustion engine, you're giving it, there's a whole bunch of chemical potential energy stored up. It's not going to do anything unless you give it a kick. If you give it a kick, bam, and it releases, it starts your car. Okay? So a lot of energy processes happen like this. A lot of energy storage processes are like this loaded spring. You give it a little kick, it gives you a lot of power. Okay? Because there's a bunch of stored potential energy. And this is important, right? If you didn't have this, you couldn't store energy. You would put energy into the spring, and then the spring would come back out. You wouldn't be able to load it and have it stay there.
No, but there are some of these little pop things. I've had some that you, like a little half-round ball that you bend inside out.
Yeah.
And they don't pop on there.
Right. So it takes time, right?
Yeah.
It eventually sort of relaxes. Yeah. Okay. You're asking me how does that work in terms of this picture?
No, I wasn't.
It's a little more.
I'm just saying I've seen it with them. I really good for you. Okay, there's one right there. See?
Oh, there's one right there. That's right. So that one, yeah. So I guess that's more like a time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for the advanced class. We'll deal with that.
Okay.
All right. So the hammer and nail demo. Did that actually work for anybody? Not really. What do you expect? Right. What do you expect to happen? My experience has been, and it's maybe because I was, hammering on something all day when I was doing it. Hammers do get hot when you hammer on them enough, but I think that particular demo, if you hit it a few times, it's not going to heat up. But did some heat up? Okay. What temperature did you get up to? Did the IR